Hello, welcome to the November 11th, 2022 Club Cubase live stream. I'm going to do a quick audio test and then we'll make sure that everything is kind of working and then we will go ahead and begin. Bear with me just for a second. All right, sounds like my monitoring computer is fine. My name is Greg Undo. I am the host of the live stream today. And if you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can submit questions in the live chat field or submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, after a certain point in time, my ability to answer questions in real time will soon be kind of eviscerated, and I won't be able to do that, but I'll try my best to go through chronologically and get to all the questions. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if you could hold off on just kind of repeating the same question over and over again, that would be appreciated. It just makes it faster to get more questions answered. When asking questions, if you could specify which version of Cubase you're running, whether it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist Pro, or other Steinberg products, or if it is what version, such as 10.5, 11, 12, and which OS, that information is helpful. We should have an index of all of the topics covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field. So you could look at that as a reference, and if you wanted to search for topics in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. We want to thank Jan from Stockholm for all his help in creating that website. And we have two people that serve as moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K, so we want to give special thanks to them. They're not Steinberg employees, they just do it to make it a better community experience for everyone. One other great resource of information that's available to the Steinberg community is kind of compiled a lot from other people, but Jazz Dude does a lot of efforts into it. But you can check out the Cubase Nation Discord. So special thanks to everyone for all of their help and their support. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, which is the U.S. distributor for Steinberg products in the United States. I'm presenting from outside of Alexandria, Virginia, which is just outside Washington, D.C. area. So if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, and we will go ahead and begin. All right, so we see from Uno Momento, just says, hi, Greg, I watched a video on YouTube about the history of Cubase, as did you. It was quite funny to notice that there are others like me who have started with Cubase since the first version. So yeah, there's a lot of loyal customers been running Cubase for years and years, and it was kind of interesting seeing kind of the developer names on the Atari screenshots, and several of the developers are still with Steinberg to this day. So all right, and we have Madge Deepers checking in from the UK. We're glad that you could join us. All right, so we have a question. How can I remove copyright background music from a video clip I shot? So probably the best way to do this, and I probably don't have a good audio example of this, but let's say if I wanted to you can get, with Cubase comes a program called Spectral Layers 1, which is a spectral editor. So if you wanted to, what you could do is I'm just going to place an audio file on my project window. And there's also a Spectral Layers Pro, which has more capabilities. We could go to our extensions here, and I'm just going to come over and we'll have Spectral Layers. So now this will integrate so that when I double click on an audio file, it's going to load it directly into Spectral Layers. And what Spectral Layers allows you to do is, instead of, we think of a lot of programs like Cubase is where we see our waveform, and as we see our traditional audio waveform, what this is showing is different frequency ranges. So what you're able to do is, instead of, doing an edit on the entire audio waveform, where it's going to be on like, individual frequencies. You could just, we can now look at this where we could say, I want to just come over here and edit only these particular frequencies. Now, if it's something like dialogue, where maybe you have dialogue in the video and you wanted to minimize the other, like, maybe a copyright, copywritten audio file that's in the background, and YouTube is dinging you, wanting you to pay all sorts of money, or wanting to run advertisements on your particular project. You can remove like the vocals with Spectral Layers 1 Pro. So let's say if I have a track, and we'll show you how to do this. So if it's like you want to kind of isolate the dialogue in the video from background music, I'll just import a track here quickly. Okay, so, and what we're going to do in this case, let's say we have our track, and this is a 2-track file. So as we play back, so this is like a fully mixed file. So what I'm going to do is select this, and then let's go to Spectral Layers again. And in Spectral Layers, if we go to processes or layers, let's go to layers. We could just say unmix stems. And here in the Spectral Layers 1 that comes with Cubase, we have the ability to unmix the vocals or a dialogue track. So I'll come over here, take the entire file, and we're going to do basically, and I make the analogy of this is like taking the eggs out of the cake after the cake has been created. And we'll let it do its magic here. And with the Spectral Layers Pro, you have more capabilities for removing drums, bass, piano, etc., other instruments. But Spectral Layers 1, that is licensed with Cubase 11 and 12. All right, it's getting there. This is like serious mathematical computations and AI learning and stuff. Okay, getting there, almost done. I picked a longer audio file, of course, by accident. All right. So now we could have our vocal file here. So so if I wanted to just and if I wanted to mute, and if I drag like the vocal file out, I could now take these 2 files and say I want this to be softer, or if I want to take the vocal and make the vocal louder or softer. So I would definitely try to do load it into Spectral Layer. So once you come over here, just go to the extensions, and then under layer, go to unmix stems, and then you could, if it's just dialogue and like a backing track behind, all you have to do is do that, and that could separate like the dialogue from a backing track. So give that a shot and let us know how it works. All right. All right, wonderful to see Jan from Cubase Index on. Okay, so we have a question. How do I move the origin point or a ruler track to match up with bar 0 of a project if I have pre-roll bars so that seconds and bars start at the same place? Okay, so let's say I'm going to go to my project setup here. Okay, so let's say if I have my audio files here and we're in kind of negative bars, and let me just, so move the origin point or a ruler track to match up with bar 0 of a project. I have pre-roll bars so that seconds and bars start at the same place. So, let's say if we're here, let's say my file is here, I could just take our cursor to the beginning. So let's say, you have to figure out so let's go ahead and I'll add a ruler track just so we could see this. So let's say in this ruler track, I wanted to see bars and beats here, but in this, I wanted to see seconds. So if I wanted my time code at this position, instead of being 2.5 seconds to be 0. I think if you go to project, you could say set time code at cursor. And then at this point, we could just say, and it says we have modified time code events. Do you want to keep the project content at its time code position? Here we could say no. And now we could have the measures automatically go, and then we could set our time code here to be exactly at 0 time. So let me know if that helps. And otherwise, if you have other offsets, you can come over here and set different project start times as well directly in the project duration. And this is in a project setup. So if you go to the project menu to project setup, you can just kind of set values for offsets there. And if you wanted to, also from the project setup, if we come over, you could have your display bar offset or display time offset set directly there. All right, so we have a question from Dallas LaRue. Will you explain what the transformer in the MIDI inserts does, and what are the uses of an expression map? All right, so let's take a look at the transformer. So go ahead and close this. Okay, so I'm going to go to my Rhodes patch here. And as we listen to this, I'm playing a C note. So C, D, E, F. All right. So when I go to my MIDI inserts, and let's go to the transformer, what the transformer is going to allow me to do is to just say, okay, we want to open up transformer. And at this point, we could kind of do like real-time MIDI effects. So we could say, I wanted to take every note and take value 1, and we'll say, let's add 2 notes to it. So I could come here. So we're going to add 2 semitones so that now as I play, if I play the same notes, and let me just open up a quick keyboard so you can see. So if I come here and I turn this off, it's going to automatically kind of transform whatever parameters I want. So I could say, okay, I wanted to transpose and let's say make the notes. So we're going to take our MIDI notes here, and let's say I wanted to take value 2, which is the velocity, and add 20. So whatever value that I play in, it will add 20 points to the velocity. So we could do stuff like that for the MIDI transformers. So we could think of this as like a real-time logical editor. So if we wanted to, like a lot of people run into problems where their pitch bend wheel will just send pitch bend information all the time. Just because it's often on the same board as the modulation wheel. So if you move your mod wheel a lot, then the pitch bend can get loose. So at this point, we could just say, you know, I want to filter instead of transforming. And I could choose to, you know, come over and delete like MIDI pitch bend data. So that's where you could use the input transformer as a particular plugin. All right, and the second part of the question from Dallas is, what are uses of an expression map? All right, so when we start working with expression maps, a lot of times when we are dealing with like orchestral libraries, we can run into different scenarios where, you know, we will have a violin, and to try to mimic what a violinist sounds like, we come over and I'll just... So let's say I have trills, and now if I wanted to, you know, come over and set kind of different articulations, you know, we could have, you know, trills, spiccato, trills, whole tone, half tone, tremolo. So if we're looking at our MIDI editor, I could just say, okay, let's come over and do, when we play this, I want it maybe to start legato. So different sounds will have all of, you know, like this particular string library will have these different articulations. So, so if I wanted to kind of change the articulation, so say legato. So if I wanted the short notes to be more spiccato, I could just come here and just kind of switch the articulations. And if I wanted these to be pizzicato, so what we could do is basically just come right over here and just switch between the different articulations. So often you would have MIDI messages or key switches. So you hit these low notes on the keyboard or high notes, and then it could change what type of sample is being triggered. So the note expression maps allow those to be organized. So you could actually switch between all of your available articulations. Just like that. Okay, so we have Robbie Bowling joining us. All right, and we have Soren joining us from Sweden. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being on. All right, and Jason Sykes from South Shields, England. Thanks for being on again. All right, and we have Claudio. So thanks from Italy, from Rome. Thanks for being on. All right, and we have Diamond District Studios from South Africa. So we have a question from Doug O. Greg, is there a way in Cubase to convert a vocal recorded to a 12/8 time signature to 4/4? I mean, you could take any, you know, record it. You know, it's not going to automatically, you know, say, okay, switch the meter from 12/8 to 4/4. But, you know, what you can do is, let me just, you know, if you wanted to get into more, you know, free warping to kind of change the rhythmic aspects of it. So let's say if we have like a vocal file, and this would, you know, probably be So, once we have the audio recorded here, we could just come over, and I'm going to go to my audio menu, and I'm going to just immediately, when I go to real-time processing, let's, we could take our hit points here. So just double click. Right. See if it pops back up here. Okay, so we could create warp markers from our hit points. So so there's not going to be an automatic, switch it from 12.8 to 4.4. It's off and going. So, but if you needed to, come over here and do free warping, where you can say, okay, I want, this particular, phrase to be earlier or later, but not kind of an automatic. Especially for vocals, you'd have to kind of manually do it. So if you do quantizing, you can quantize to, an eighth note or to a quarter note, but it's not necessarily going to take something that's in like 12/8 where you have 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, and convert it into 4/4. But you could probably just easily come over here and manually warp it. All right, so let me go through some more questions. So let me know if that's helpful, Doug. Okay, so we see Eddie on drums. Clark just asking, did you know Chris Bristol? So the name doesn't sound familiar, but I'm not sure if it's directed to me or not. All right, and we have Bob Demers checking in from Saratoga, New York. And we have Larry from Brampton, Ontario. Okay, so we have a question from John Costigan from Kenosha, Wisconsin. Says, I've created an odd user error with Cubase 12.05. I dragged a MIDI chord change to the chord track. Instead of naming it, it changed many of the notes. Okay. Okay, so let's say I'm going to just see if I could recreate this. So let's say I have a chord track. Okay, so it says I dragged a MIDI chord change to the chord track, and instead of naming it, it changed many of the notes. All right, so it could be, so let's say I drag this to the chord track. So let's say I have this, and I drag it to a chord track. Okay, so here we can see that it's basically handled that. But sometimes what happens if the track here, John, it go to the inspector and then go to the chord track and see if you have, you might want to make sure that follows chord track for the existing event is set to off. So let's say if I switch this to follow the chords now, we can, and if I come here, that it may revoice the chords based on that. So try taking the particular event and under the chords inspector where it says follow chord track, if that was the basis for the chords, just set that to off and see if that makes sense. All right. So we just see a question from Larry. Is what you're showing now an available feature in the default Spectral Layers that comes with Cubase and doesn't need the Spectral Layers Pro version? So, if you want to just extract the vocals, that's available in the Spectral Layers 1. But if you wanted to extract drums, bass, piano, and other instruments, that requires the Pro version. But just for, what I did in removing the voice from that track, you could do with the built-in Spectral Layers 1. Or the included Spectral Layers 1. All right, wonderful to see Gerald Ely from Martinez, California, and Michael Pierce. All right, so we have Stefan checking in from Sweden as well. All right, and we have Monos from Thessaloniki. So yeah, thanks for sending over your guitar track. I got to listen to it right before we started, just quickly. Thanks for sharing that. All right, we have Mr. O from Cali, Colombia. Okay, we have a question from Benny. Asks, is it possible to send projects with VST Transit to another computer that I have? I work in different studios and my hard drives are built in, so it'll be difficult to move them. So you could definitely, you might need to have, if you upload it in the VST Transit, you could just simply, at that point, if you wanted to, log into your VST Transit credentials and download the same projects, you could do that. You might also, if it doesn't allow you to download it, maybe if you create two different My Steinberg accounts, that you could access it from a different studio. But, there's also a number of, if you want to just kind of share the projects and not be so much in kind of a collaborative, not so much in a collaborative mode, then, at that point, simple like Google Drive or WeTransfer is also a great option. Okay, so we have a question from Esteban Carlos Benson. Can you show us how to use the MIDI monitor that is built into the MIDI remote UI property sidebar? This appears when in edit mode. All right, so let's come over to my MIDI remote. So, so the MIDI monitor. So now if I just kind of move particular parameters, I'll start from scratch on this. It may already be defined. But let me just see if I delete this. And I click on the plus sign. So now we could just click on so control change. So let me just see if I may need to start this from scratch. Okay, so start from scratch. Okay, so if you, and I think this kind of intended for, like, okay, so I want to create a control surface, and maybe I don't know what the MIDI message is. So let's say, okay, it's maybe a control change. So I think, I haven't really worked with this so much, but So that's one way of doing it. And let's say if I'm in another, I can show you another MIDI monitor. So let me just see if we have, if I click on the plus sign here, just make this. All right, so let's say if I start from scratch here, and I want this to be, I'm just going to make sure. So, but it, all right, just try it one more time. It doesn't seem to be. Let's see if I disconnect it quickly. I could try with a different device and see if that's going to cooperate a little better. So I think it's really just going to, like, as you work on it and you go to add a device that you could see, because as we go to, you know, add particular devices, that, you know, you could see what the incoming MIDI message is if you're actually setting up the MIDI device where it's not automatically kind of capturing the MIDI message for you, like if you're adding it on instead of adding the object from the particular MIDI controller when it captures the MIDI data. All right. All right, so we have Mark Winslow checking in from Hawaii. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see single notes, yes, but is there a way to convert audio, say 7-finger piano chord progression into MIDI using Cubase Pro out and Pro out of the box plugins? You know, so currently there isn't like functionality to extract the audio, but you could determine what the chords for the audio file are, but not to extract the chords into MIDI. So. See, Eddie on drums is saying, Chris Bristol is CEO of Roland Corporation. I knew Chris's father in Los Angeles. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm just kind of an Oompa Loompa worker bee, so I don't get to hang out with owners of a lot of different companies. I know some people, but I don't know Chris. I know Jay Wanamaker very slightly, who also works for Roland, and I have some other friends that work there. All right, so we have a question from Patrick Emmanuel A. Says, "Hello, Greg. Happy Friday." Sorry, how to automate a group track, like putting alpha tool on group. I want to automate that for entire track inside group. Can you show us how to turn on and off plugin with automation? All right, so if you wanted to come over, we can show you how to work kind of the same way. But let's say I'm going to come over. See if I have, don't think I have that project open. So let me just. So if you wanted to do like an LFO on any parameter that you want, so let's say we could use kind of a loopback function for this. So let's say on this track I have an LFO going on as a MIDI insert. So if we open up the Auto LFO plugin, so I could take kind of this particular performance. So I have one LFO on this that's going to just kind of send MIDI controllers, let's say for panning. So if I wanted this to pan like in half notes, and I wanted to adjust my volume, let's say to eighth notes, or to 16th notes, so we could do different LFO functions via kind of MIDI inserts if you wanted to. But sometimes when people want to figure out how to actually do an LFO for a parameter, let's say, that's not necessarily has actual, where we could learn a particular function. So if we come over, let's say, to our dual filter here. So if I wanted to just come over here and adjust, let's say in the drums, the position, and I wanted to drive this. So you could download what's called, on the Mac platform, you could use IAC, but there's also different MIDI loopback tutorial things. So we're going to create just an empty MIDI track, and we're going to assign the Auto LFO plugin here. And what I want to do at this point is we'll go to our studio setup, and we're going to create a generic remote. And what we want to do on this remote is we're going to say, we're going to take this MIDI track. First of all, we'll take this MIDI track and we're going to send it out of our IAC bus. So send it out to your loopback. Now we go into our particular generic remote. So we'll say, okay, we're going to say the input is coming from the IAC driver. We'll set the output to the IAC driver. And we want to say we want to capture this particular MIDI message. So we've captured this. And what I want to do now is to go to Fader 1 and let's go to Mixer. So, and we'll say I'm going to go to the glitch drums track, and I'm going to now come over here to Inserts, one dual filter, and I'll say let's adjust the position. So now that we have kind of just captured this position, let's see if we have this. did this right. So now we could just have that parameter, any plugin parameter, just automatically responding to the LFO. So if we go to this track again and open up its MIDI inserts, I will come over to the auto LFO. So if I wanted this to be like every measure, or if I wanted it to be spread across like 2 measures, and if we wanted to kind of change the shape, so we could do different stuff like that, or if you want it to be kind of random. So again, just kind of take the auto LFO on one track, send that to the MIDI loopback into the generic remote. You could learn and capture the incoming MIDI message, and then that LFO and that plugin will be able to drive any parameter on a group track or MIDI track or whatever. So. All right. So we have a question from Manos. Can we edit a guitar mono track to remove a harsh sound without making it sound completely digital? Can we just create warp points and fade out the sound at specific points? So let's say we want the guitar to sound less digital. So, you know, when we do processing, I will come over here, just load up a track with guitar on it. You know, think of maybe doing subtractive EQ on a guitar. So let's say if I'm here, and let me just revert this to get back to our normal state. So if I wanted to just kind of jump to the guitar part, you know, and go to the EQ. So let's say we'll just solo this track. And I'll pan it in the center. So, you know, we have a lot of control over the frequency as well as, you know, how wide or narrow and your gain or cut. So you should be able to kind of dial in kind of, you know, any sound, you know, probably if it's sounding digital, it's probably not the EQ's fault with that. So, you know, but just kind of very easily dial in the EQ sound. You know, people getting, you know, amazing guitar tones in Cubase for years, you know, and, you know, people like Eric Johnson use, you know, Steinberg stuff for all their work. So, okay, and we have the question, can we just create warp points and the fade out of the sound at specific points? So if you wanted to create warp points, all you have to do is, like, once we're in free warp, and again, we could just come over, so we'll activate free warp here, and if you wanted to just kind of paint in, you could drop notes in the free warp markers. So if you wanted to do that, and then you could warp, or if you have hit points, we could edit the hit points, and then under create, we could just say, okay, I want these to create warp markers. So now when we go to audio warp, all of the markers have been placed via hit points. So you can just come over here and, you know, manually put in warp markers, or have the program kind of do it for you to warp. And kind of the third question, can we fade out the sound at any specific point? So, you know, if you wanted to, you know, a number of different ways of doing this. So let's say, okay, I just wanted to go to my range and say, okay, I want this to fade out. At that point, I could just say, let's process. And then I could just say, okay, let's fade out that clip. So we could do it just like so. If we wanted to do it on the main project window, you know, we can cut any point here and just do fade ins or fade outs just by grabbing the end handles, and you could do that at any point in the project as well. All right, great to see Camille from Czech Republic, and great to see Gareth on as well. See Gerald Ely has to step out, so. Okay, so we have a question. Hey, why doesn't the bass slide like FL Studio doesn't work? Like FL Studio is their solution. So, you know, it really could depend on the instrument, you know, that's sliding to it. So, but if we wanted to just kind of do, you know, what a lot of people are doing bass slides for, or portamento, you can just come over to, like if you're using like the sampler track. So let's say, I want to do like let's say I have my sample. And then really all you have to do is, you know, enable glide. So let's say we go to our pitch, and then at this point there's a glide parameter. So at, you know, once we come here, I can put this into monophonic mode. Now, if I wanted the sample to not, if I hold down the first note and hit a second note, that will play the sample at the new pitch without starting the sample from the very beginning. So just make sure that you activate mono mode, and you know the glide is often just, you know, dependent on the instrument, but the sampler track does this. And then you could, you know, whether you want it to be in legato mode, and just simply come right over here, and you could just adjust the glide time. So if you want that to be faster or slower. So you could adjust the amount here. So you could just say. So play around with the sampler track. All right, so you see Filter Freak saying, ho, 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 it's Friday, can't wait for the goodie sale on Monday. So yeah, there will be a Steinberg promotion for Cyber Week, so check that out. Okay, so a question from Bob Demers. What are the pros and cons of using a control room? So when kind of working on, you know, particular projects, one of the things that we want to do with the control room, and one of the chief intentions, and, you know, often when you look at a large format console, you have, you know, many of the same channels just repeated over and over again, and then this center section. So let's say I was doing a particular project, and we'll go to our control room. So many times when people are mixing, they may take like the entire mix and use their master fader as their volume control, and this could affect kind of the overall gain of the project. So here I could just have a monitoring path that's separate and unique for that. And if I wanted to listen to, we have different downmix presets. So let's say if I wanted to go from stereo to mono to see how that's going to translate down to mono. Now once we have so again, this is a separate, just a monitoring volume. And we could set, we could dim it, or we could set it to known reference points just by clicking here, and you get hit Control or Alt or Option, Alt Option to set kind of the monitoring path. Now, one of the other things that's interesting is I could just say, okay, I want to take is having a listen bus. So I could come over here and say, okay, I want to take my vocal here, and instead of soloing, I could click on the L button, and what this will do is it'll dim the other tracks down. So if you want to hear it kind of in context, you can do that. And let's say, okay, we have this, and I wanted to just listen to like the reverb. So a lot of times people will want to make critical reverb decisions. And if you solo the reverb, it solos the source is feeding it. But if I wanted to only listen to like the reverb here on the Revelation, so I'll just say, let's put it on. So now I'm only hearing what's in the reverb without hearing the actual source track. So if I wanted to now EQ the reverb, that it's isolated in the monitoring path. Now, if you have different sets of speakers, you could take the outputs from your audio interface or your converter and connect them to different speakers. So we could say, okay, let's come over here and go to our monitor. So instead of having a piece of hardware, which ultimately colors the sound, you can say, okay, I want to switch from my HS7s to my Eves, to my NHTs, to an Auratone, and you could just switch between different speakers. We also have kind of a dedicated plug-in path. So if you need to do room correction on the monitoring path, and you're doing that via a plug-in like SonarWorks or something like that, at that point, we could do this without it being incorporated into your exported mixdown file. We could set up different headphone mixes for different musicians with talkback. So if we needed to, come directly, to different, to feed different actual, headphone mixes that are independent of each other or listen to external sources. So those are some of the features you get in a control room. So once you kind of get it set up, you would go to your studio menu, go to audio connections, and you may see, probably have an output, but choose it not to be connected, and then just set your monitoring path here, and then your control room will be configured for you. So a very powerful part of the program. All right. See, John Costigan says he'll set the chord setting to off and that his ability to create chaos knows no bounds. So, all right, so you see just Isotope RX apparently splits music up into layers. Has anyone tried using that before throwing the audio output into Cubase MIDI converter? So I think it's going to be kind of like the Isotope is going to be very similar to the Spectral Layers and break the instruments, but not necessarily convert it into MIDI, but I could be mistaken. All right, so we have Brianna joining us from Youngstown. It's great to have you back on. We've missed you. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. All right, going through comments. Thanks for all the great discussions. All right. My chat field just jumped. All right, so try to find where I was. All right, so we see from Stefan Carlos Benson, so you're saying it doesn't show MIDI data when you've already added a UI component to the screen. So I think it's, let me see if I get this going again with my MIDI remote. Make sure I don't have. Okay, so let me see if I could just get this to work again. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not transmitting it now. So make sure I don't. Yeah, it's probably okay. Yeah, so I'm not sure why it's not currently remapping that for me. So I think that it normally would, it just doesn't seem to be cooperating today with it. Sorry about that. All right, so we see from Paul Daly, hi all, is it possible to have the phone's output in the control room follow the Q selection or follow the Q section selection for the mains? So let's say if we have the headphones at this point, you could, have for the main area, so these are going to be independent, so that, if you wanted to listen to someone else's headphones in the in the studio, if you wanted to listen to different people's headphone mixes with your headphones and go to the main and just simply have your main mix here. But when you put headphones on it, you could audition, so they're not intrinsically linked, but you could have them function independently. All right, so we see from Nick Saya, hi Greg, when editing CC, specifically sustain, how do I switch between curvy line editing and hard straight line? All right, so let's come over here. Let's say we want to go to CC64, so let's say so I think a lot of times it's going to be just, the value that you draw in, let's say for the CCs, that you could just draw it in kind of like this. So like a lot of times when you're doing the edits, it's going to just capture, you know, like the on off aspect of it. And then if you needed to, you know, switch that, it's just, you know, taking that particular node and moving it to kind of the on or off position of the MIDI CC, but the MIDI CC data will be the same. But often when you're doing editing on it, you may notice that it's going to look straight up and down because the controller that's been captured is probably 0 or 127. And sometimes you may have some control, you know, some libraries that will respond to soft pedals and different, you know, dampening on the sustain pedal, different amounts of the sustain pedal, and that's why you could draw in various amounts. All right, wonderful to see Michael Teams on the live stream from Weatherford, Texas. I think the virtual ice cream will begin. Michael, let me know if you got the email about the prize for the WaveLab license for you. So, all right. So we see. Hi, Greg. Could you please explain how to use the automation panel, please? Okay. So just revert this. All right, so you can open up the automation panel by hitting F6, and there's going to be, you know, different automation modes. So let's say we'll just open up and let's clear my throat. Hang on. All right, so we could switch between touch, auto latch, and crossover and trim automation. And when we do this, we could choose to, you know, globally turn on automation for selected tracks or selected parameters, and we could, you know, choose our different automation modes. So let's say I was mixing and automating this particular project here, and like let's say I just didn't get to this track at the beginning of the project and we're in the middle. Like say let's automate to the start. So now if I just wanted to, I move the fader down and say this is our level, we'll notice that the automation to the left of the panel will jump down because we automate it now to the start or to the end of the position. If we have a loop, so let's say if we have a range selection and this is within our loop point, I could just say I want to go to loop, and as I move the fader here, we could say I want this value within the loop. So anything that's in the loop, those two automation points will automatically be written at that particular loop. We could choose also, if we go to settings, to use something called virgin territory. And so if we wanted to go to, let's say we don't have any automation here, so I could just say let's just automate, and it's not going to kind of put. So as soon as I stop writing, we don't have automation before or after. So, and as we look at this, now we could also choose to suspend reading and writing of different elements. So let's say I wanted to automate, I have the channel open, and let's say I make the cardinal sin of I'm in automation, and I do like a little bump. And then at this point I say, oh, let's adjust the EQ. And then I rewind, and I realize that I just automated the EQ changes. But maybe I didn't want to automate searching for the EQ point. So we could suspend reading and writing of different elements. So I could say, I want to be able to adjust the EQ, but not. So it will say suspend writing of the EQ. So I can make the changes, and those won't be automated. So we could suspend reading and writing of different elements. If we have a number of different automation tracks, I could say, you know, show the volume automation of like different tracks, or show panning, show EQ, show, and we can say show used automation, and this will open up every automation lane in a particular project. Or we could hide different automation modes as well. So it's a quick overview of the automation panel. And if you go to settings, something else that a lot of people miss, let's say if I have automation going on in this particular track, you could say, let's show data on tracks, and then you could see the audio waveform. So if you wanted to just come there. So now you could just come and write the automation and see the waveform in the automation lanes. Sorry, I have a little tickle in my throat. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so we have a question from Patrick Emmanuel A. Greg, how to detune a loop in audio? I usually do it to make it thicker and richer. Can you explain detune a loop sample? All right. Okay, so let's say we have this particular loop going. I'll activate the project. And if we wanted to detune without changing the length of it, I could take this particular loop. And then if I select it, we could go to transpose directly here on the transport. So we have transpose value. This will do it by semitones, or if we wanted to do it by cents, we could do fine tuning control. So that will just transpose it in real time. So that's all you have to do, is just from the info line, you could just do transpose and fine tune right there. All right. Okay, so we see Manos just saying with digital, I meant not affecting the original recording. Thanks anyway. The notch EQ is a nice idea. So, all right. So we have just a question. How can I tune drums in Cubase? All right, so let me just, we could do kind of the same approach here. So let's say if I wanted to go to this particular project, so let's say we have drums and, bass and guitar. So say, again, if I wanted to select the track or select the event here, and then we could transpose. So that way, if you have like your kick is playing and you're like hitting an F note and the song is in the key of E, you could just transpose it down. If you have Groove Agent on, something else that you could do is as soon as we look at the particular instrument, we could drag and drop like an audio sample or samples directly into Groove Agent and say, okay, I want to drop this onto a pad, and then we could also, if you wanted to do coarse tuning here, you could do that as well. So a number of different ways, but try just to select the event, and then you'll see transpose and fine tuning right there. All right, so David M just says, hi everyone, always best live than watching later. Why is that? It's the excitement of it. So we see from Esteban Carlos Benson says, on my end, it doesn't allow incoming MIDI data based on what was demonstrated here. The instructor didn't show it displaying any data either. So yeah, for some reason it's just not capturing. I'm sure I'm just having a brain cramp, but yeah, I know I did it this morning on in building a quick MIDI remote setup for testing. All right, we see that Michael Teams is doing the ice cream distribution. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Are there different fast ways to select the start and end of a cycle? So one way is just to come over here, and if you use like the range tool, you could just hit P, the letter P, and that will set the cycle based around the event. Or if you select an event, hit the letter P. You could also, if you click up here while holding down the Alt or Option key, you can, or the Command or Control key, and just click, you could set the left and right locator directly there. You could also just grab the left and right locators, and if you wanted to, just come right over here and resize to particular range, and if you wanted to move the whole range, you could do it just like that. But P is a good shortcut for a lot of that. So again, I want this part, or I have to do a punch in on that. You could just hit the letter P, like for Paul. And at that point, you can set the left and right locators based around the actual event. And there's a preference also. If we go to preferences to editing, I think we could do cycle follows the range selection. So now anytime that I do a range selection here, that will automatically carry over for that will set the left and right locators to match. So again, that preference under editing, cycle follows range selection. So just a couple quick ways to do that. So we see Paul Daly just saying L for mixing sends is a gift. So that's good. All right, my chat field jumped on me. So, okay, so I think I'm back in the neighborhood where I was. All right, so we just see I'm testing different interfaces and want to see to verify what data they send. So, another way of doing this is just to grab like your MIDI monitor. So if you go, if you wanted to see what MIDI messages are being transmitted, go to an instrument track, go to your MIDI inserts, and then just choose your MIDI monitor and open up the MIDI monitor plugin, and then you can see whatever MIDI CCs are being transmitted and their values. So you don't have to use the MIDI monitor in the MIDI remote setup. You could just see it on a particular track through the MIDI monitor plugin itself. All right, so we just see from Ronald Boykin, sorry. Greg, my graphic icons in the MediaBay disappeared. How do I get them back? All right, so let's take a look. We go to, so make sure So I'm not sure if it's if it's here, like these icons. So one is, make sure that you go home and that you're in loops and samples, or you're in like the VST instruments, and then you should see, or the VST effects. You should see all of the different icons appear directly here. If not, what I've seen some people do that have had these kind of disappear is if you go into your preferences, and let's say if we go to, like on a Mac OS, we would go to Library, and then to Preferences. So we'll see Preferences, and then there's kind of a MediaBay. So you go to Cubase. All right, so we're here kind of in our Cubase 12. And then there's a MediaBay 3.db file. Hang on just 1 second, I have to respond. Okay. So in here, just into preferences, so there's going to be MediaBay 3.db. So sometimes maybe if you move this file out of the folder, and if you're on the Windows platform, an easy way to get to this location is we'll come over here to So on the Windows platform, if you go to like your start menu and then go to your Steinberg Cubase 12, and then you'll see user settings data folder. So try moving that MediaBay 3.db file and try just moving it. Don't delete it necessarily, but try moving it to your desktop and then restart and see if all the icons appear again for you on the right zone MediaBay. You see, yeah, Ronald's running it on a Windows machine. All right. See, Paul Daly just says, okay, I use a Q for a reference track, and I was hoping to A/B the Q on both phones and mains output with one button, no problem. So let's see if we could, might be able to do it in a macro. So if we come here, let's see if it's available maybe in. So let's say if I go to my control room here. Yeah, it doesn't look like we could do it with the key command. But yeah, it's probably not the end of the world. Sorry, you have an extra mouse click. All right, so we just see, hi Greg, I'm from Angola. In Spectral Layers, I separated the vocal now. I want to reduce the noise on vocal. Also, I can't open this vocal on Very Audio. So yeah, I'll show you how to do it. So say we do a new project. So again, I will just come and let's get to our Spectral Layers. Layer, and we'll unmix. Sorry, wrong one. And we will unmix the stems and say, okay, I just want to do the vocals. So once we've extracted it, all you have to do is drag it from Spectral Layers into the project window. Give it just a couple of seconds here. We'll get this done. All right, so now we listen to it.
Let me let you know what I'm about and what is.
So now I drag the vocals from here in Spectral Layers. And now at this point, if I wanted to so we could at this point just say, okay, I want to do I'll just make this permanent quickly. Or we can just come over to, I'll just bounce it for, so I can make it permanent, or just go to audio. And then we will choose to bounce selection. I'll replace. And now at this point, we could go to Very Audio and be able to run it through more processing and tune the vocals. So at this point, I could just take these words and move them way up. So maybe not that extreme. Sorry to adjust my mic here. So, but so I'll move these down a little bit. So, but you could, very easily just do your, I'll move it up a semitone. So, and then if you needed to do like gating and get rid of noise, you could do that just as easily. So that's how you would do it. So once you do the unmix, just drag it from the Spectral Layers, drag the vocal out onto the project window, and then you could make it permanent or just do a bounce selection. Then you could do further processing on just the isolated vocal. All right, so we see the Heartbreak Time Machine just apologizing for being late to today's stream, so don't worry about it. No tardy slips on the live stream. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Can a range selection tool be rendered in place when the selection has a vent in it plus empty space? All right, so let's say I wanted to take just a little bit of a range here, okay, and let's say I'll delete that. And let's say I want to put like a really bad reverb on this or a flanger so it's obvious. All right, so I think, if we wanted to join these as one single event with the range tool with the silence, you could go to audio to bounce selection. And now that's going to be one single event. And then if I wanted to take this with the range tool and do a render in place, so the bounce selection doesn't include the processing, but if I wanted to render in place, we can go to the render settings, and instead of separate events, we'll just choose as one event, and then we could do the complete signal path, and then we could render in place, but if I don't have it armed, that would help. So again, I'll just render in place, and now we'll have, and let's see if it's with the range tool, and see if I could render in place with the range tool as well. Sorry, I hate that. Always mess that preference up. All right. So now we could just render with the range tool as well. With the flanger and any space, you could just do it like that. So let me know if that's what you wanted to accomplish. So I just see, does Greg have strep? So I have just a little bit of gunk in my throat that I didn't get cleared out before I started. But my son and wife have been kind of coughing for the last 10 days. All right, and we see Michael Teams has granted me 1 gallon of fresh Texas peach ice cream for my family and myself. Thank you very much. All right, so we see, can track transpose be automated? So let's say if I wanted to automate a particular element here. So let's say, okay, I want to. So I'll take this and I'll just kind of split it up a number of different ways. So if I wanted to just come and say, okay, let's transpose up 1, transpose up 2, transpose up 3. So we could just create new sections. So then it'll go up. Let me tell you lies about myself. Tell me if you're educated. Don't you know you graduated last September for your third degree? It doesn't show because you don't know. I was telling lies about me. So now if I wanted to go down
I was telling lies about myself.
to the origin, so that, so that's one way you could automate some of those particular changes. Let me know if that makes sense. All right, great to see Best Green Jesus from San Diego on. All right, we want to all wish Michael Pierce a good gig tomorrow. It's his first gig in 2 years. chat field just jumped on me, so let me just get back to where it was. Okay. All right, we have Alter Ego that's joined us. All right, so we have from David M. Greg, how do you use the on-screen keyboard? Never experimented with it yet. Never experimented with is yet, but thought I would ask. Thanks. So anytime that you have, I often use it like when I'm traveling, or when I was traveling pre-COVID, and I'd be stuck in hotel rooms and I didn't carry a MIDI controller with me, or sometimes I just wanted to actually show different quickly, like where maybe I if I hit my MIDI controller, it may not make sense to what's going on visually to kind of get a point across. But if I wanted to just hit Alt or Option plus the letter K, you can now just use kind of the you could play notes in just by kind of clicking on the keys, or just by, if I hit Q, W, E, like my Chordy. So you could, one thing to be aware of as you're using the keys to play, and if you wanted to also just come here and say, if you want to do, you could set up for pitch bend and modulation. And you could also just see, like, if you click in the lower right hand corner, you could just kind of see the mapping of the particular notes. But one thing to be aware of is sometimes if you have the MIDI keyboard open and then it's like, oh, why isn't this particular keyboard shortcut working? Once the on-screen keyboard is turned on, the ability to use those particular keys for keyboard shortcuts and other functions will get kind of transmitted to the on-screen keyboard. So just be aware of that. So if you go crazy, I open this up and now none of my keyboard shortcuts work. It's that the MIDI, the on-screen MIDI keyboard controller is kind of taking those particular keyboard messages and grabbing them first. All right, so we have a question. What would cause a fader in a mixer to go down on its own? So, generally the faders, some things that may be not as obvious, check to see, one, if you have automation on. So, if you're doing this and you notice that the R is turned on, you could actually see if, there's automation that was maybe accidentally written in. So let's say if I was looking at this particular track, and then all of a sudden it's like, you just see the fader going. So make sure, one, that there's no automation, or that was maybe linked to another track, or if that was, assigned. But, generally, unless the faders aren't going to move unless they're directed to, or they're being kind of linked to another track. So you might automate. So let's say I have this track and I was automating this track, but these two tracks are linked together. So I'll just come here, and now when I adjust one parameter on a different track, if it's linked, that may write automation into a separate track inadvertently. So check to see if you have actual automation on the track, and I bet you do, or if it's within a linked group and another track that's sharing the same link is automated. All right, so you see Eddie on drums. Clark says, okay, I use Spectral Layers. I can now isolate Pigmeat Markham's vocal. socket to and judge. The background rhythm is easy to understand. That was a test. All right. All right, so we see Pocket Drummer just says, love your live streams, learning a lot from these. That's great. All right, so we have a question. Greg, how can I avoid in MixConsole when using mouse wheel to scroll tracks left and right and go up and down for individual tracks, routing EQ sends to accidentally move and change fader values? So there's no way to do it, but if you accidentally, like let's say you're here and you're moving this and you got a little happy and you accidentally moved a particular fader, one of the things you could do is just hit Alt or Option plus the letter Z, and that will, so say I moved this fader accidentally, and then I could hit this icon here, and that would give me kind of an undo history for the studio. So I could say, okay, I moved this, moved that, I moved these. Just come over here, and now you could undo any of the changes. And if you need to see more detail about that, you could go to the full MixConsole here and see the edit history, and then that will show you, okay, we moved this volume fader here, we moved this channel, and that will give you a history of all the edits that you've done in the mix project. So all right, reading through buttons. Michael Pierce says smack the like button. So all right, so a question from Alter Ego. I'm using a Midas M32R. My monitor outputs are analog outputs number 3 and 4, 7 and 8. How can I get this to work to be able to switch monitors in the control room? So what you do is go to your studio menu to audio connections. You'd go to your control room and say, okay, we wanted our 2 monitors. So we want to add the monitors here. So right click, add monitors. You can have up to 4 different monitors. And at this point you'd say, okay, I want outputs 3 and 4 going to my Yamaha HS7s, let's say. And for my Eve monitors, I wanted outputs 7 and 8. So now to switch between the 2 monitors, we could just come right over here and just switch between our monitors directly here. Or we could see under the monitors tab where we could switch. So once you define the actual output path, you can now come over here and switch the monitors like so. All right, so the Heartbreak Time Machine just says like button smash with an exclamation point. See, Lawrence Koch just says, I think I remember Chris Salim having a video and reference tracks on Cubase. It might be worth a look. So yeah, I think I was the first one to figure that out and did that. So you can see it on the Q&A video series I have in the Cubase YouTube channel. All right, and we see from Alter Ego just says, I watched your video in a control room, but I cannot get the Cubase to see my other outputs. So make sure in the mixer itself that you have, both outputs from the mixer, like the audio from the mixer, from your Midas unit, from the M32R. Make sure that that is set to go out of both outputs. But make sure that you're actually getting audio out of output 7 and 8 and outputs 3 and 4. All right, so we have a question from the Heartbreak Time Machine. What do folks typically use Spectral for? It's a tool I know nothing of at the moment. So we could think of it as like, being a lot of people use it for kind of, corrective editing, where, because when we do an edit here on our project window, we actually cut all of the frequencies. But let's say we had like a great guitar performance, but there was a squeak. At that point, that's when we could go into Spectral Layers and say, okay, instead of cutting everything out, what I want to do is just take that guitar squeak and be able to minimize that guitar squeak or get rid of that guitar squeak altogether. So I don't necessarily want to edit all the frequencies. I just want to be able to do edits on specific frequencies. So that's when people will do spectral editing. Okay, so we have a question. Are there limitations to what can undo do in Cubase? I know that there are differences between Control Z and Alt Z, but not sure. So think of like Alt Z as, control, the typical Control Z. We could think of that as for edits. So as soon as we want to, if I come over and, move an event, I'll just open up my edit history here so we can see it. So I'll go to edit history. So, I move an event, I truncate the event, I fade the event, I want to change the fade. We can see all of these functions, and when we want to undo those, we could just kind of scroll right back through time. Now, the Alt Z is going to be dedicated towards the mixer. So let's say I'm in the mixer, and I'll go to my edit history. I moved this fader. I want to open up the channel EQ. I wanted to add a plugin. I wanted to adjust the parameters on the plugin. So now this doesn't have anything to do with edits, but it's a separate independent history for modifying effects and components inside of the MixConsole. All right, so we just see all right. Sorry, my chat field jumped on me. Okay, so we see a question. See how to change the tempo without affecting the video because I'm scoring for movies, so I need it badly while changing tempo. It should not affect the video. So as you do any time stretching, the video is never going to be time stretched in Cubase. So that would be done in kind of the video editor. So, Cubase can time stretch the MIDI and audio, but there's no provisions for it to, like as you do time stretching, for it to stretch the video. So, because the vast majority of people, will never want the video stretched because they're writing to, a very, specific edit, and they don't, it's sacrilege for them to change the, video editor's decisions. All right, so it says, many thanks, Greg, but you missed to reduce noise in the spectral layer in the vocal. So anytime that you have so spectral layers elements doesn't necessarily do noise reduction, but if you have like the full spectral layers, so let's say I jump over here and we do, The full spectral layers will allow you to, so the spectral layers one that comes with Cubase doesn't have noise, but what you could do is find kind of just an isolated bit of noise in spectral layers. Often just say, okay, I wanted to, this part here is noisy, and what we could do is if you go to process, we could just choose to do noise reduction. You could register the noise, and then at that point, when you get a noise reduction, just come right over here, and then you could filter out that noise. So that's not in the Spectral Layers 1, but in Spectral Layers Pro. But once you have the vocal that's isolated, as I mentioned before, you could run it through any audio plugin, such as denoising and stuff like that. All right, so we see from Alter Ego, anything's about the control room, so how to add them in the control room. So what you want to do, again, is get to the audio connections, and I'll just get rid of one of my monitors here. So say I have my Yamaha HS7s, and really all you have to do is right-click and say Add Monitor. So, and let's say these are, I'll just put this in for my Ortone, and you can say, okay, I want this to be stereo or mono, and then again, set the output directly from there. All right, so we have a question from Jose Antonio Gazo. Question, I work with CPU heavy mixes. What can I do to stopping it from freezing and popping and cutting audio while playback? The first thing is always increasing the buffer size. So if you come over to your audio interface and realize that, when we look at this, we could say, okay, go to your control panel of your audio interface and increase the buffer size to the highest amount. Think of it like a really bad I Love Lucy episode where she's working in a factory, and and all these items are coming down a conveyor belt, and you have to take it off the conveyor belt and put it into a box. The larger the buffer size, the slower it goes, and then you could more easily put different items into a box as if it's going on a faster buffer size where the speed of the conveyor belt is going over. So once and if you have the buffer size all the way maxed out, come over and, render and place tracks to apply particular processing. You could also freeze tracks, and that could render the processing into the particular files for you as well. All right, so just seeing more discussion on the getting the Midas working with the control room. So, make sure, that you have the Midas is set, to actually output, so a lot of times, you may have multiple outputs, but make sure that you have, internally, a lot of times when we're using just an audio interface, it doesn't have, it's pretty much, doesn't have routing done, but in mixers, the routing may already be kind of pre-configured for monitors or some other scenario. So make sure that the different outputs are configured, and that, if you switch outputs, the cables from 3 and 4 and 7 and 8, make sure that, the outputs that you're hearing in 3 and 4, if you connect that to the outputs on 7 and 8 and don't hear it, then it's going to be a problem in the mixer and routing internally in the mixer. And we see from Alter Ego, it just says not connected. So Let me just clear my throat. All right, so again, come over to, if it says not connected on your other output, again, just come here, choose the audio device, and this would be, set up for, if you see that, it's not connected. And then if it says not connected here, this is where you would see outputs 7 and 8. So you would just route it directly there. And then when you switch the monitors in the control room, it would automatically send a signal directly from, to the different outputs from Cubase to your audio interface. All right, Michael Teams wants people to whack the like button. All right. So we have a question. How do I configure Cubase and Nuendo to always boot with my Apollo selected as the interface? I get a splash screen always asking me to choose. So if you're on Mac, certain previous Mac OS systems, if you had an HDMI connection connected, like an HDMI display connected, would always prompt you to, route the audio out to the HDMI. So on some Mac OSs, maybe 11 and earlier, that it would automatically just do that, and it's something at the OS level. So on my M1 Mac, I don't notice that. And on my PC, it always comes up to the same interface. But there's a little glitch in earlier Mac OS versions that would automatically, if it sees an HDMI cable connected, that it kind of wants you to send the audio directly out of the HDMI output and will prompt you every single time. And it's just something in the Mac OS, I've had, many discussions with the people that set up the labs at Berklee College of Music, and they pull their hair out with Apple on this issue. So it's kind of an operating system issue. All right, so just see from Patrick, says how to use saw, sine wave shapes, and automation and pitch bend. So, and I guess this could also help with Nick Saya's question as well. So let's say if we have automation going on, there is, so if we wanted to have like sine wave or square wave, we could just come directly here and automate just by switching the tool. So say, okay, now I wanted this to be sine wave from here, and I could hold down shift to change the frequency of that. So now we could do sine wave. And if I, wanted to do, parabolas, triangle waves, again, we could just now just kind of draw in. So we can say, okay, now I just want to draw this in. We could have it synced. So you could just switch to different drawing tools. So if you're doing, and Nick, if you're still on, you could, try just to enter in on like for the piano roll editor if you wanted to do that for like your question. So if I wanted to do like, controller 64, I can now switch to square wave. And then you could just kind of draw in different square waves like so. So let me know if that helps, Patrick. All All right, so you see from Alter Ego, and I think this is still with the control room, 2 monitors, says I'm getting audio from both outputs, but Cubase itself is only seeing outputs 7 and 8. So Cubase can see whatever audio outputs are available from the device itself. So if Cubase only sees 7 and 8 and not 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, then it's something in the device that's not allowing those outputs to be released to be accessed through the USB. All right, so we have a question from Michael Graybill from Dallas. Thanks for joining us. When inserting silence globally, how do I get tempo track to respect the changes and shift events accordingly? All other tracks shift, event shift, just not tempo changes. All right, so let's do a new project here. Or I'll just jump to R1 just to show this. All right, so I'll add a tempo track up top. All right, and turn this on. So let's say we have tempo tracks. All right, so what I'm going to do is globally select, and I think it's just Control or Command plus. And, you may have to take this out of divided track list mode. So I'm going to come right over here and we're going to say, so we see my tempo track, and I'll just put my tempo track at the top here. Otherwise it'll be kind of, all right. So now what I'm going to do is hold down Control and Shift, or Control Command plus Shift, and with my range tool. So I see we're in the middle of our tempo, and what I want to do now is to go to Edit, to Range, and then we could just say Insert Silence, and now all the events over, so make sure you may have to, if you have a divided track list where the tempo's at top, you may have to, temporarily disable the divided track list by clicking here. But then just hold down Control Command, and that will do a global selection as opposed to just the events, and that will include tempo. And now at this point, go to Range and Insert Silence, and then all the tempo will be shifted over with the events so that they have their correlation. All right, so we have a question. Is there a way to hover with the mouse cursor over a plugin button or fader and move a button on the hardware controller to set the selected parameter of the plugin? That would be awesome. So, we could do this already. So if you have a CC121 controller, it's called an AI knob that you hover, and then you could control different parameters, anything that you're hovering over. So a lot of people wanted this, and if you didn't have like an AI, if you didn't have a CC121, so I'm just moving the knob. But what you could do now is go to, let's say, the MIDI remote. Hang on just one second. I'm just gonna... But if you wanted to now control different parameters, at this point we could, if you go to selected track, or go to what you call mouse pointer AI knob. And what you could do now is just come over here and say value at the mouse pointer, and we could just map that particular parameter to function as an AI knob. So anything that you hover over will automatically be controlled directly from there. All right, so now just to kind of show this, I'll remap this. So we'll come over to transport and we'll go to mapping page. I'm sorry. So the mouse pointer AI knob. So we say value at mouse pointer, apply the mapping. So now if I have different parameters, I just hover over. If I go to plugins, we could do the same. So I want to come over here to, let's say, my reverb. So now I just hover and it's controlling automatically. So just again, come to the go to the mapping assistant for this, and it seems like my controller may have woken up on me. But now we say, okay, let's go to mouse pointer AI knob and select that particular value, and then whatever you want to hover over is being controlled just that easily. So it is awesome, Harry. So okay, so we have a question. Hey, Greg, how can I make one point in the automation be center when panning, or zero value automation so I could type the value I want? Okay, so a lot of times when, so let's say if we have a particular value here and I want to change this node, so it's tempo. Let me just put on automation. All right, so if I want a particular node here to be at 0, you could just type in 0 right here. But let's say if we do, panner, and you just put on. Just write panning automation in. Okay, so now we have our standard panner. So if we wanted this to go to kind of a default value, so here we can say that our default value is at 0. And if you just hold down control, so if you select a node here, you can say I want these at 0. Select it, hold down Command or Control, and click on it, and then hit Enter, and that will zero out to the default status on the panner. So right now we're at left 23, but if I wanted these all to be set to 0, click in the value field, hold down the Command or Control key plus Enter, and then at that point you could just kind of center them out. So, for any of the different nodes, you could, just see it right here. So, so experiment with that. my chat field jumped on me. Let me just find my spot. All right, so we see from Patrick, can Cubase make a video on how to mix and master a whole track on Cubase? Because I bought iZotope recently. I saw their official video. It's perfect, clean, and clear. So we need Cubase to kind of, to make kind of one. Can you? I mean, I think that, we could show you kind of the basics of doing a mix. I'm not a huge fan of, I think that every song should be mixed differently and presents unique challenges. So I'm not a fan of everyone does these three things and then, people wonder why all the mixes sound very similar. But we can definitely kind of create a video on how to, route effects and, inserts versus sends and working on parallel processing. But if you want to email me exactly what things you want to get out of the video, we can make sure that we could include that. So you could email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so we see from Balsa says, I was so disappointed when I bought X-Touch 1 control and realized that the big jog wheel can't control plug-in knobs. I would love to have that option. So, definitely try assigning it to the, to the mouse pointer. And I'm going to see because I'm going to try to set, I know we had looked at kind of creating, I'm going to try to check the MIDI monitor again because I disconnected something. And I think I may have my USB communication back. So let me just try this. And I think it's for Estevan. So I'll just see if it's capturing. Right. I'll just see if I can start this from scratch one more time. See if I get my MIDI communication. For the MIDI learn. Nope, still not. Oh, all right. Don't know why it's not working. Sorry about that. All right. All right, so let's move on. All right, so we have a question from Chris Johansson. Hi, Greg. I have some post-production tracks I would like to add to my project. I know the tempo and key of the post-production tracks. Please, can you show how I can change the tempo and key to make them match? Okay, so if you have... if you know what the key of the particular, song is, once we set a global key, so let me just come over to the settings here. So we can set a project root key. So at that point, you can say, okay, the key of my song is in A. So now as you drop files in, if it has the key information on the actual audio file itself, so when you go to your pool, let's say if you have the media and if it's imported into the pool window, at this point you could say, okay, I know what the projects are and the tempo is, let's say 100 beats a minute. We could also just say, I want these all to be in musical mode. And as we kind of scroll over, I think we'll see a setting for key. Let me see if it's so root key. So as we do this, we'll kind of just scroll back. So we can say, okay, we see our root key indicated here. So enter. So say, okay, I want these all to be in the key of A. So now as you drop it in, it will kind of match the key of the project and will transpose. And once they're imported, because in the pool, we place these into musical mode. So then the timing will come over here. So go to the pool window, make sure that you have all the files selected, that they're set to musical mode, that you have the tempo and the key set. And then whatever you kind of drop in will match the key and tempo of your project. All right, so we have a question. So it says, hi, Greg, from Sean Kelly. I have a MIDI drum loop, and I want to quickly randomize the kick velocity and position a little bit, but I don't want the first or last note to leave the box. Is there a way to do that? Thanks. All right. So I'm not sure if the loop is in MIDI or audio. I'm going to assume it's MIDI. If not, let me know, but let's come over here. Okay, so let's say I'm just going to drag a pattern over. All right, and I will just loop this particular part. Sorry, wrong key. Okay, so let's say I look at this, and we're going to see that my kick is on C1. So that note, so let's say if I want to randomize the kick velocity and position. So what I want to do is I could just go to my MIDI logical editor. So we could do it for all notes by going into the MIDI modifiers and randomizing the position and velocity. But if you want it to only be for the kick notes, so I'm going to just select those particular kick notes so we can see the velocity and the position. So go to my logical editor, and let's go to setup. So I want to say we want to take notes that are equal to let's say value 1 is equal to C1. So now what I want to do is to take, let's say value 2, which is the velocity, and I want to set random values between, let's say, 80 and 120. So now what we could do is we're going to take all notes that are C1, and as I do this, we could randomize the velocity, as you see, and let's also just randomize the position. So I will just come to the position, and we can say set to random values between, let's say, minus 20 and 20. So now as we do this, we could randomize the placement and the position of the drums every time we do this. So let me know if that's helpful for you. So, or if you just completely destroyed a beat like I did. But that's how you could set it up, and you could save that as a preset and, call it up anytime. All right, so we just see, sorry, my chat field just jumped on me again. So we see from Featherlight Studio, hey Greg, great live stream as always. Will Cubase ever allow us to click and drag and reorder tracks and buses from the MixConsole view? So I know it's a long-standing feature request. I thought, I was hoping that it would be in by now. I know that the development team's aware that people want to do that, but I'll make sure to kind of reiterate it again and let them know. All right, so we just see, can you guys do a video on how to mix broadcast audio using Cubase DAW? So, we could do like a post-production. I think that there are some videos, if you check out some of the Nuendo live streams for broadcast, and those functions would be applicable for Cubase as well. Sometimes we have a hard time getting assets to use for stuff like that, but I'll put on the list of videos to do. All right, so we have a question. I have a Newmark PT01 turntable USB. How do I get the signal into Cubase? It's not showing up in inputs, F4. So I'm not sure if you're running Mac or PC, but basically you would need to, if it has an audio driver, so you probably need to come over here and go to your audio system. And, if you're on Mac, you will probably see maybe a USB audio codec, or select the actual device here. If you're on Windows, you'd probably go to where it says generic low latency driver, select the device here, go to control panel, and then set the inputs, to the actual turntable there. So, you may have to, tell it, which, when you use generic low latency, that's kind of using the generic Windows drivers. And then you would just have to tell, it, to accept from your turntable as opposed to your microphone or your HDMI input. So once you have that set up there, then it will allow you to capture the audio as long as it's, transmitting the audio over a standard audio driver. All right, and you just see further clarification. It shows up in Windows as mic input, but no option in Cubase to bring the signal in. So again, it's going to be because Cubase is using ASIO drivers. So what you need to do is just to come here and in the audio system, select generic low latency audio, go to the control panel once you select generic low latency audio here, and then specify that it's looking for audio from the turntable. All right, so we have Balsa just saying thank you so much for all the answers you provided today and greetings from Montenegro. So always wanted to go there. All right, so we see from Professor Aviva, hi Greg, I just recently comped 7 different takes on one MIDI piano track. Any way I could instantly select just the active events of the comp so I can edit the whole comp track in the key editor. All right, so let's say, all right, so I'll just solo this and I'll just do a quick comp recording here. All right, let me just put it in. So I'm not sure if you've done kind of, let's say I'm going to set this up in my MIDI record mode, and let's say we will create new parts. So here I'm just going to, let's say if we do we'll do stacked record. Okay, and so we'll come. All right, so now, so I see my key editor here, so I will come over here and just do a quick comp of it. So I'll grab my comp tool. And then I could see, so I select the different events. So I think now if we wanted to make this seem cleaner, we could just say bounce MIDI. And at that point, so once you have the kind of the comp selected, we could choose, and if you wanted to be able to go back to the comp, make a duplicate track version. So click here, duplicate track version, select those events and go to MIDI and choose to bounce MIDI. So now we could come here, we see all of our comp in one nice friendly part. And if I needed to change the comp, I go back to the previous track version, and then I can make an edit or change the comp here. And then, so we could just come over here, use different track versions. So now when I just double click, we can see everything very cleanly in the editor here, like that. All right, so we see Alter Ego just says, I guess he found part of the problem is in the mixer, so. All right, we see how Eddie on drums. Clark is just solving plumbing issues while watching, so that's good. Multitasking, talented. All right. Okay, so we see from Patrick, Greg, while working on the song, I get stuck in doubts, for example. It's on my mind, but I couldn't bring into Cubase. How to overcome that? Do you have any suggestions, and how can I clear doubt while working on a project? Realize that, we can capture everything. So there's no consequences of just capturing everything. If you're working at Cubase at home, you're probably not spending, you're not spending $100 an hour probably in a studio with, high anxiety. You don't have to make every decision. You can record multiple takes and come back to it. It's not like, okay, we have to do this, a bounce to 2 new tape tracks, and we're going to lose, all of our individual mixes, and we get it wrong, that, we can't go back, so if it's just kind of overcoming doubts, like the most empowering thing you could do is just record and don't have doubt about it, and, so many great songs have been recorded, and, people will tell you, it's like, oh, like my friend David Kahn, like the person, he did Walk Like an Egyptian by the Bangles. And that was actually sent to him in error as a demo. The songwriter intended to send another song, and the songwriter had doubts about the song. He's like, no, we're going to do this song. It's going to be a big hit. And it's like, no, I sent you the wrong song. You should do this one. This is the one I meant. I'm so sorry. I sent you the wrong song. So that person had doubts, and then, someone else didn't have doubts about that song, and, ended up being like, a cultural sensation and a #1 hit. So, doubts are okay. There's no huge consequences of having doubts. Just record, get stuff done. You can move on. You can add to it. You can come back and be at the same spot where you were. So It's an easy way. Just, don't worry about it. Don't have doubts about it. Just record and capture everything. So we have a question with the MIDI remote. Is there a way to map SYSEX commands to functions? So I think you can, as long as it's set up to actually, because it'll accept, I think it'll basically accept any MIDI information. Let me just take a look and see if there's anything with it. So if I come here. But the one thing to be aware of, so I think it will capture it. But the one thing to be aware of is that Cubase may be filtering the SYSEX by default. So make sure you go to the preferences, and that under MIDI to MIDI filters, that SYSEX isn't being filtered out. So I haven't tried with SYSEX. I don't have any controllers really that transmit SYSEX. I know like the old PV1 was capable of doing it to PC 1600, if memory serves, on the model number. All right, so we have Perry Michael Allen saying hello from Italy. Have you heard, and the question is, have you heard anything about Audio Lens functioning on Mac Catalina? Thanks. So is that the isotope utility for comparing? So I haven't played with it yet. I saw that it was free, if that's the utility I was thinking of. But I haven't experienced it. All right, so you just see a question. Any update on CC121 compatibility in Cubase 12 Apple Silicon version? So it was just released, I think, last week or the week before. So it is working natively on Apple Silicon. So make sure, I think it's a 1.8 version that you could download. All right, so we see from Michael Graybill, thanks, Greg, closer to solving the tempo track events, not shifting with insert silence issue. The only thing that works so far is using the range tool on the tempo track isolation instead of globally. So, make sure that that you don't have a divide track list, but you could also just, so as soon as you just hold down, control and shift, that will do kind of like, a global copy or global selection. So at this point, so make sure you're doing that. And I think you're kind of on the right path. All right, so we see from Matthias, hello, Greg. I'm back. Last stream, you teach me a lot about my first guitar recordings in the equalizers tab. What's the parametric one? High shelf. Also, I'm recording 2 guitars. Should I EQ them the same? So you don't have to EQ the 2 guitars. You don't have to EQ them the same. So, you can, but a lot of times people want kind of different tonalities to make it sound a little bigger. But when you look at, different EQ types, so say if we come over here, we can say, okay, I want to switch this type to a parametric EQ. So what a parametric EQ allows us to do is we could, you know, if we think of a graphic EQ, a graphic EQ allows you to boost and cut at a particular frequency. So you can say, okay, I'm going to boost this by, you know, however, you know, whatever dB value that I want to work with. So, but what a parametric allows you to do is, so not only can we adjust the frequency, so if we come here, we could adjust the frequency that we're choosing to boost or cut, and then we could, how much we're boosting or cutting. And what makes a parametric unique is the Q. So we can say, you know, when we come here, we can say, okay, we're going to start EQing at 24 hertz, and this band could last through 491 hertz. That's a pretty significant kind of bump in the low end. So if I wanted that to be narrower, what I could do is now we could just have a very narrow Q, and we could adjust that particular EQ to just be more isolated in particular frequencies. So parametric EQs allow us to, you know, adjust what's called the Q, so we could have it more narrow and broad or more tight and focused on particular EQs. Now, when we go to like a high shelf or a low shelf, so say what we could do now is as we adjust, think of it as a shelf. So we're not going to be able to really set a Q, but we just kind of, you know, just kind of take the overall low end or the overall high end. So say I want to do a high shelf. So at this point, as I boost, it's just going to take those particular frequency ranges and kind of, you know, boost up from that particular frequency point for you to do. So, but you don't really have control over narrowing or widening that particular EQ. All right, so we have Bruce checking in from Simi Valley. All right, so we have a question from, all right, just make sure I didn't miss any. All right, so Matthias also asks, can you give me advice about filters? I'm doing a simple track main guitar and solo guitar. So a lot of times when you're doing filters is, you know, you want kind of different frequency ranges to kind of be able to, you know, not kind of infringe upon each other. So let's come over. I think I have a guitar solo in a project. It's, yeah, this one here. All right, so all right, so let's say we have this, and all right, so this is our guitar solo. So let's say I go to the guitar tracks here. All right, and wrong track, sorry, let me just. Okay, so say I'll come here to this guitar track. So now if I want to do EQ, that's probably like kind of diving into the EQ frequencies of the lead guitar. So if I wanted to come to the other DI guitar part, So just, I always like to think of, like as you're mixing, like if you think of a drum kit is just great because you have your lows in the bass drum, you have your mids in your snare drum, you have your highs in your cymbals and hi-hat, and you have kind of like lower mids using toms. So those are kind of different frequency ranges. That's why drummers will play the hi-hat, kick, and snare because they have lows, mids, and highs. Think of frequencies like that you want to have a good balance of lows, mids, and highs. So if everything is low on a bass, it's not going to sound good. You need a proper balance of mids and highs to make the lows come to life. And guitar will be often considered kind of very mid-range, but you need to have lows and highs in there in kind of the proper proportion. So just make sure that those aren't all kind of sitting and fighting for kind of the same, if we're to think of this as like a little bit of like high mid range here, and we don't want multiple tracks kind of fighting for that particular frequency. And that's why you have to be like really careful. Like keyboard players, when they play by themselves at home, they often play down low because they don't have a bass player there. So when they play down low and the bass player is there, you may want to have them just change the arrangement or not play in a particular frequencies when the bass player is there. It's like stop here, don't play below this particular note. So make sure that you don't have different elements clashing with each other. Okay, so we have Bruce checking in from Simi Valley. Great to see you on again. Okay, so we see Eddie on drums. Clark just asks, okay, I monkey hammered Spectral Layers, unmixed vocal bit. I got some interesting results. Need to isolate bass only. How to do it? So once again, if you have the Spectral Layers Pro, that it's going to automatically be able to isolate, the particular a particular bass. So when you come over here, it's kind of the same process. So Spectral Layers 1 that comes with Cubase is going to be just for when we go to unmixed stems, but will be just vocals. But the Pro, we can do vocals, piano, drums, bass, and other. So if you have the Pro version, and you could always try a trial version of it if you don't. But it can be pretty stunning what it can do. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, I have Cubase 11 Elements. How do I record directly from my keyboard to computer as MIDI using the keyboard sounds and styles? I have a Chord PA4X. Let me just clear my throat. Hang on. So, if you have you could come over and let's say we do a new project, and what you want to do with the Chord is to set it up under a MIDI track. So if we do this, we can say, okay, we want to add a MIDI track. And if you're probably doing an arrangement, it's going to have more like, drums, bass, pianos, melody. So you probably want this to be on MIDI channel any. And what MIDI channel any will allow you to do is to record multiple MIDI channels onto one single track. We could then split that by going to MIDI and selecting dissolve part and separate by pitches. What happens a lot of times is the internal sequencer of a lot of arranger workstations only works inside of, and this could depend upon the particular workstation, but often the workstations, you kind of play like a chord and it will do the arrangement for you. And you play the chord and, be in a particular style or arrangement. Now, often the arrangement that's generated is not what is transmitted out of the keyboard workstation. So if you play a chord and it follows the chord and you play a melody, it may capture the melody and the chord, but all of the arrangements may only be used for a lot of the devices, may only work internally. and they don't record that information out. So, but you could try it. So, set a MIDI track, set it to MIDI channel any, just hit record and see if, as you do your performance or if you play back your sequence, if it's going to actually transmit that information. A lot of times it doesn't, and it's a design intention of the keyboard to do that. Okay. All right. So we see from Deadline question. Hi, Greg. Hope you're well. I have a track that has tempo changes in them, but the tempo track isn't showing, and I can't add it. With Command plus T, I can see the tempo changes, but you think we all need to have? All right. I'm sorry. You think? But I can't get the track back. So, one thing that you could do if you have like a lot of different tracks. So let's say I want to add a couple audio tracks. I want to add a tempo track. And I want to come over and let's add some more audio tracks. So let's say, I have like a big project and I can't seem to find a tempo track. One is check visibility to make sure that the tempo track isn't just hidden from view. Another thing you do is just hit Control or Command plus F and just type in tempo. And that will take you to the tempo track if it's on. So if it's not allowing you to add a tempo track, it could just be hidden. So you could be here and say, okay, I go to add a tempo track. It's grayed out. I click here. I want to add a tempo track. And then it doesn't allow me to. So it could be just hidden. Or if you have so many tracks, again, just Command or Control plus the letter F, like for find. And then just click and then just type tempo in. And then even if it's hidden, let's see if it's hidden. It will allow you to just jump to the tempo track, even if it's hidden right there. So as soon as you search for it and hit enter, it will activate the tempo track into view. So maybe it's just hidden, or it's just like way at the bottom, or it's way at the top in a divided track list. All right, so a question from Patrick. Greg, you and Cubase have traveled for almost 30 years now. How you feel you can share us what you learned for all those years, and what's the most important thing you think we all need to have? So, I would say the most important, I said this at Advice once, and it really resonated with a lot of people. Like, the most important thing you could do in your studio is just hit record. Just do it, spend the time doing it. Don't be intimidated by stuff. Realize that Cubase can do, just a myriad of tasks really well, but it doesn't mean that you have to know every single thing that it does. Figure out what you want to do, but, realize that, if you make a mistake, it's really, there are very few consequences. So, it's not, I came up, on analog tape, and I saw an assistant engineer on a big session, put a reel of tape on top of a speaker, and some of the tracks got lost. So we don't really have a lot of things like that in the studio, and it's so accessible to approach. When people say Cubase is expensive, I remember like being so happy to get one Lexicon LXP1 reverb for more than Cubase costs. And that was just like such a breakthrough. So it's such a great time to be able to create music at home and take advantage of it. And, use the technology, and but don't be afraid to, and don't be intimidated by it. Just hit record and capture your ideas, and think of it like, if you're intimidated by Cubase and starting off, think of it, you didn't, your first time you picked up a guitar, you weren't Eddie Van Halen, or you weren't Oscar Peterson the first time you sat down at a piano. You sat down and you figured out, you didn't learn how to talk like, like the very first day you were able to formulate words. It took time, and that's what it is with Cubase as well. But, just have fun with it, and, just capture your ideas and hit record. All right. So we see from Daubsky, hi, Greg. I want to swap the click alt functions with click control functions. Is this possible? Especially to copy tracks. I hope you understand. So some of the modifier keys can be changed. So if you go to Preferences, and when you go to Tool Modifiers, let's say if we go to like the Selection tool, so let me see if some of these, let's say drag and drop. So if you want to copy, you could switch that to, instead of Option, you could switch that to Command, or vice versa. So if you wanted to change the modifier keys for different functions, just go to Preferences, to Editing, to Tool Modifiers, and look in here, and then you could, have different modifier keys or swap them around. So try that. All right, wonderful to see Tim Weinheimer's on. All right. All right, so a question. Thank you for all your teachings. One more question. How can I clean a hot signal? And by hot signal, I mean a guitar solo that sounds too loud, kind of annoying to the ear. So when something is, the most powerful EQ that you could do is, and a lot of people, have just, instead of adding frequencies, is, people spend a whole, really, high powerful mix engineers will spend a whole lifetime of subtractive EQ, and after a while with experience, you kind of know that, these particular sounds work well, so why do bands have a guitar player that plays a Les Paul and a Stratocaster in the same band? So different guitars, but the Les Paul is not going to sound as bright, and the Stratocaster isn't going to sound as deep as a Les Paul. So you kind of, musicians will naturally kind of make these decisions in the instruments that they play. And when it's kind of already, beyond the point of like, this is what I have to deal with, think of subtractive EQ, think of narrowing, like, the panning spectrum on it. So if you send it to, put less effects on it. So, but, my one piece of advice would probably be, investigate subtractive EQ. So. All right, so we see from Outlaws Workshop, says Cubase is not expensive considering you get so much more than a MIDI audio recorder. Says I've been using Cubase since the very first version on Atari ST. Fond memories. So. And Best Green Jesus says this is a great perspective. Every drawing starts with one stroke. Eventually, it turns into something. So. All right, so we see from Julian just asked, hi, Greg. When I transpose an audio clip, I can hear some random clicks when I play it. I have to bounce it in order to work properly. Realize that, when you're doing like a real-time transposition like we showed earlier, where we're just doing this, that process is happening in real time, and it's going to take CPU cycles. So if you're doing that across, a number of tracks in a project, sometimes being able to just do the offline rendering can make the CPU strain, diminished, so that, you don't hear clicks and pops. So see Eddie on drums. Clark says that he's a dinosaur. He appears on vinyl recordings. So. All right, we see Sable Winters. She's like number 105. Thank you so much, Sable, for getting on. See, I'm catching up slowly here. And if you have learned a new tip or trick, make sure that you actually hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I should probably always say that more. All right, so I think I'm kind of caught up. I'm going to go to, I know we had questions that were sent in advance, so let me jump to those. Thanks, everyone, for the great questions. All right, so we had a question. How to do free warping on multiple tracks. All right, so let me just open up a project. See if it's in my recent list still. Don't see it, so let me just open it up. Okay, so, one of the reasons why we want to do, warping across different tracks. I know Gareth loves when I play this, just because I asked him to play like a really badly timed guitar part intentionally, which is hard when you're a good musician like Gareth. So Gareth is so good that he can sound bad, but as a session guitar player, when the situation is called for. So let's say we want to, we listen to... So let's say we have like two microphones on a guitar. So let's say right there's some. So what we want to do is, we could select these files, and, we could see that, when we go into our hit point editor, that, we want to edit the hit points. We'll find kind of the rhythmically significant parts, and we'll make sure that these all kind of look, we could adjust these accordingly. So, and now what we could do is just say, okay, I want to take these two parts. I'll just go to audio and go to real-time processing. We're going to create warp markers. So when we go to our warp tool, we can now see that we have warp markers applied to both recordings. So if we say, okay, I want this to be, directly on. So I'm going to switch my warp mode here to free warp. So now as I move the events, and I'll just come over here, and let's say we want to select both of the events here, that we can just warp both parts simultaneously if they're both selected, just like that. So we don't have to put it into a folder. We don't have to lock the folder. We could just take these different elements here, and while they're both selected, just warp both of them to kind of correct any, perhaps timing irregularities. All right, so we have a question. Is it possible to have a shortcut to open the lower zone into a full window instead of mouse click on the arrow in the lower zone? And also a shortcut to close the full window. Best of the shortcut is a toggle shortcut. I'm wishing it's almost Christmas. All right. It seems like there's a shortcut attached in the screen dump, but I can't get it working. Can you, Greg? All right. So if we are doing, I think the mixer will just be the F3 key to go back and forth. But if we're doing like audio or MIDI editing, so let's say if I was doing MIDI editing, I'll just join these parts together quickly. And we wanted to launch this into a separate window and back. I think the key command you can find under editors. So we'll come here to editors and we'll see open in separate window / lower zone. So I think I assigned this key command to command I just assigned that. So at this point, if I'm in my MIDI editor, I could, just say, okay, I want to take this and oh, I'm sorry, wrong key command. So I just have this, so I could hit that button, and that will take me to, and holding kind of the same key command will toggle back and forth between the lower zone to a dedicated window. And if we're on a sample editor, we could do the same thing. If I'm on a sampler track, I could do this. And let's see if the doesn't look like it works for sampler track, but so again, just come over to key commands and under editors, open in separate window / lower zone. So try to set that up. And the mix console again is going to be F3 to toggle back and forth. So once again, same keyboard shortcut just to do that. All right. All right. So we see, could you please demonstrate how the new label function works during tomorrow's live stream? This is in the MIDI remote. So let me see if I could get this to cooperate here real quick. Just reboot this. See if we get the MIDI remote. All right, so there's a new function in the MIDI remote setup to actually see kind of the labels. All right, I'm going to try one more time, see if this is going to see my... Okay, so now it's woken up on me now. All right, so as we do this, all right, so one of the things that we have now is a label. Okay, so once we activate the label, so just to kind of look at it, we'll come over here. So let's... Okay, so I'm going to So we're here, and so we're going to have this function as a label. So in my mapping assistant, and here when you see like our learn, we can see now the control change because it's kind of automatically show up here and what the value is of our control change. So for Estevan, so it just kind of rebooted. Now it's kind of working as expected. So let's say, okay, I have this function assigned. And what I want to do is we'll go to, let's say, our mapping assistant on this function. And I'm going to choose this to be selected track volume. Okay, and we'll apply the mapping. And I'm going to add just a number of audio tracks. Okay, so as we come over here, all right, so I'm just going to capture this one more time. So let's say we'll add our label field. All right. Just okay, so we have this, and let's go ahead and add our audio tracks again. So how it's supposed to work is now if I will assign this for mapping. Again, we'll go to selected track volume. All right, so we could see, and I'll make this just wider. Okay, so we see that the name of the particular track, so I have this selected. So now I have audio 4 selected. So now that I select a particular parameter, the label of the track will automatically show up here. So let's jump to like Amos Moses project. So now that I have this set, we'll go to our MIDI remote. So it's kick, and I could see exactly what track is being controlled. So I select the bass, we could see the color, and the track name automatically carried directly over to that. So it doesn't go on the event, but there's a label underneath of it. All right, and we had another question with the remote. Can you explain what we can do with the lamp function? So this is brand new into Cubase 1205. So let's come over here, and I'll just make this. So we'll put in what's called a lamp. So we'll come and let's put parameter 2. So I'm going to put a lamp. So we're going to turn this into, so what a lamp function will do as we send to the, instead of seeing like a physical knob or a fader, what this will do is it will just send the values, but it's going to just illuminate the actual device. So if we wanted a lamp to be, brighter as it's more, as we're sending more values. So as I increase the actual parameters from 0 all the way up, the lamp will just transmit the values. And this could often be used for like MIDI lighting systems and stuff like that. But you could actually just see the value here within the MIDI remote control. Hang on 1 second. I have my son knocking on the door. Bear with me just for a second. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. All right, so let's go to the next question. All right, so we have a question. It says, "I've got a question. According to the free warp tool. After warping the process, example drum mix. When I'm bouncing those files, the waveforms change visually. It's very irritating. I want to know if that's normal or just a visual thing. So the question is, could you please show the whole warping and bouncing process, please?" All right, so let's take a look. So let's say I'm here and I want to add, my warp markers. So say I'm free warping. Okay, so let's say we just have some warp markers, and I'll just put some more in, like so. All right, so now if we are at the point where, we actually do warp marking, we are going to see a visual change in the waveform. That's the whole idea, is that, with free warping, that we're taking the different elements here and correcting rhythmic issues. So as we do this now, if I wanted to take those particular waveforms and say, okay, and I'll just do something like really obnoxious with them. So let's say we'll go back to our free warp tool. And, as soon as we would do a bounce, if I move these super close together like this, and we do a bounce, that it will reflect those particular changes, because free warping is rhythmically moving the different, files together, so that as soon as it does a bounce selection, that those rhythmic changes are going to be incorporated. So basically, when you bounce a selection, all of the files are going to, accommodate the warp changes. So, but let me know if I misunderstood. It's from Mick. All right, so just see a question. I have one question. Why has ASIO Guard suddenly become a problem on my laptop with the same VSTs and plugins, especially in Cubase Pro 12? Sometimes playback is almost impossible. So, there's a couple of things that it could be. So realize that in Cubase Pro 12 versus other or previous versions, is that the audio performance meter is different. So it indicates exactly what is for the currently selected tracks under ASIO Guard here for the particular process. So these are tracks that that are set to record or monitor enable, that need to run at lower latencies versus what the real-time processing, where we are just playing back tracks. So this wasn't in version 11, so it may seem higher, but also Make sure on your Windows laptop that when you go to your audio system that you're using the Steinberg power scheme, that you have ASIO Guard activated here, and that you activate multiprocessing, but always run the power scheme, the Steinberg power scheme as well. And if you still have issues, check out Latency Mon by Resplendent Software. And it could be that you have like your display driver is causing issues, or a network driver, something like that. All right. So we have another question. I have a MIDI track containing chord progressions with staccato chords and longer chords. I want to create chord events for the chord track, but only the extended chords are shown and not the staccato short notes. And they were kind enough to send a file over with this. So let me just find the particular project. Okay, so we want to do chord detection for the longer chords as well as the shorter chords. So when we look at this particular event here, so we see that we have the shorter chords, and I'll just open up my global track here. So let's say so we can see the chord track directly here. So when we look at this, and I select all of the chords, and we go to project, and we choose to go to chord track and create chord symbols. The default setting here is to not have notes that are smaller than a 16th note. So if we hit OK, so we see that, when we look at these chords, they're really the same chords, whether they are shorter or longer. They may not include all of the particular notes, but it's going to be the same, physical chords. So we come here, we say, okay, we have an E, so that's captured. Yeah, so but one thing that you could also do is, like if we wanted to do the chords again, so let's say if I just move the shorter notes here, and we go to project, and we go to chord track and create chord events, we could set this to be, to 0. So now when I hit OK, if I do it right, let me just select. So project. That, but as we move the chords, regardless of how long they are, we could see that the actual chords will be distinguished. But I think, like, when you're looking at this, it's going to analyze that as the same chord, whether it's smaller rhythmically or not. But again, in the chord track and go to the create chord events, you could always say ignore notes shorter than and set that to 0, and then it will do the analysis on all of the chords for you. All right, so we had a couple questions sent in. Hello, here are a few questions for tomorrow's Club Cubase session. I feel free to select any and all or none. Some of these may not be possible, in which case consider it feature request. So first question, is there a way to split expression map articulations when cutting a region rather than having them deleted? Okay, so I think I just played like a little string part here. We'll listen to it. Okay, so we have different articulations here. So I'm going to just split the, and when I look at the expression map here, and I thought maybe this could be dealing with attributes or or direction. So these are all set to directions versus attributes. But now when I go to split, let's say in the middle of this part, we could look at it and still all the VST expressions are there. And even if I wanted to cut, let's say right in the middle of a longer note, in the middle of an articulation, it's still not a problem. So it seems like they're all still playing back the same. And another thing to try, if it's still kind of, creating problems for you, is to go to the note expression or to the expression map and try setting these to attribute as well. So an attribute is tied to a particular note, and the direction will be tied until the next, that'll keep the same value until the next one starts. So, but give that a shot, but it seems to work and play back fine. Okay. So we see a question. Is there a way to delete redundant nodes on track automation lanes? All right. So let's say if I'm here and we have, so say if I have a lot of automation nodes in, one of the things you could do in the automation panel, if I hit the right button and go to settings, is we could say, okay, I want a reduction level of, let's say, 10%. So as I draw in automation, we can see a lot of points, and now I could just reduce that by 10%, or let's say reduce it by 50%. So now as I would draw in a lot of values, it's now going to reduce those values by 50% here in the particular, automation reduction level. So especially if you're kind of, writing from a control surface and it's just spitting out, a lot of data that's kind of unnecessary between the two values. But you could also, if you find that you have two automation values that, are really, close together, you could just select a node and hit the left and right arrow buttons to select nodes. So say, okay, I don't need that one. I don't need this node, and just hit the delete key. So you can quickly kind of go through your automation nodes like that. All right. So question, is there a setting to prevent automation points from connecting when gluing parts together? Okay, so let's say I have these three events, and let's say now I'm going to glue these events together. And when we glue the events together, we're going to take events and turn them into a part that is a container for events. And it seems like that the automation was the same. So let's see if we move the events that the automation is tied with it. So it seems like that kind of works as expected. So let me know if that's different on your end. All right, so I had a question. Can Greg tell us about an eye-opening client meetings? Can you share with us a little from all these meetings you've had around the world and how we can become successful technicians or songwriters? I think you have a lot of good advice for beginners, especially for us professionals. And says, Greg, an idea to you. Maybe you can give us one idea story in Greg's eye-opening as a very last Q&A in every live stream. Yeah, I'll try to do this, but if I forget, if someone could remind me, I guess one eye-opening thing that was, I've had, I've been so incredibly fortunate to have great experiences and, meeting so many of my childhood heroes and people that inspired me to get into, to be a musician, to get into recording, So like I was thrilled recently, like the person that inspired me to study music in college was a bassist named Jeff Berlin. And, I can, remember listening to a track he did and, sitting mesmerized in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven where I just had to go home and practice more to try to play that well. And being able to help him was great, and I always loved, like, I'm a huge Beatles fan and Steely Dan fan. One thing that was really interesting, a story I'll share. I got a call from David Hewitt, who's kind of probably the most highly regarded live recording engineer in the world. So, and he had a truck. He ran a record plant truck in New York, and he ran the Big Silver truck for remote recording. I first met him when I was an audio engineer on the Eric Clapton's Crossroads session. And he became a big fan of Nuendo and loved it. And he gave me a call one night and said, "Oh, Greg, can you be in New York tomorrow morning?" I'm like, yeah, I'm in town in DC and I could, catch a train up. And he's like, yeah, meet me at this address on 57th Street, or I think it's 57th Street, and meet me here. If you could be there at 10 a.m., that'd be great. So I caught an early morning train up, and then I find his truck, and he's like, go into, and it's like, this building here is Sony Studios in New York. I think it's now condos. And he told me he's like, go in and talk to this guy named Joe Palmasio. And he has a project he needs help with. And he's using my computer. So go in, knock on a door. And it was really interesting because he was actually transferring all of the Steely Dan master recordings. So this was the first time that they had found all the original masters since they did the CDs when they first came out in the 80s. So, and they were capturing them with the Pacific Microsonics converter at 32-bit 300, and I think they did it at 176.4K sample rate. And Joe was terrified of computers, and he had to be the guy that baked all of the master recordings for Steely Dan, but being able to be in a room and help him kind of do all the transfers from analog to digital, and hearing and just seeing and touching the original Steely Dan master recordings for, like, Can't Buy a Thrill and Asia and Gaucho, and kind of being in a room. And it was kind of like a big secret at Sony, because if everyone knew what was going on, then every audio engineer in the world would want to just sit there and hang out and be a fly in the wall. So I was lucky. Joe was a little terrified of the computer, and I didn't want to be the guy that burnt, because the tapes had to be baked for a bit, and Joe did that, and I helped him out with the computers, and everything worked out great. So that was an interesting story I got to be involved with. So. But if I forget to share insights, just let me know, and I'll be happy to share other stories. All right, let me jump back to our live stream here. And thanks again for all the great questions. Let's see if we have more. And if you've learned something new, make sure you do hit the like button. All right, let me just go back. All right. All right, so from Outlaws Workshop says, got a stupid question. I recently saw a video where someone had some extra space in the timeline before 0. It actually showed a few bars with negative numbers before it. Seems useful sometimes. So if you want to do that, a lot of times we'll start at measure 1, but if you hit Shift S or go to Project Setup, you can see display bar offset. So here I'll just set it to 2 bars. And I'll hit OK. And we'll get asked if you want to keep the project content at its positions. We'll say yes. And now we do that we have measure 1, a measure 0, and a measure -1. So that's how you could, and people would do this kind of in the old days. Like if you were synchronizing to tape, some of the synchronizers may take a little while, so they give themselves like a measure of buffer for the sync to all catch up. But if you wanted to, like have everything done and it's like, oh, we just need to do like a little drum fill intro, you could just add that time and record onto it. So to do that, again, go to project setup and display bar offset. You could just put that to 2. All right, we see Best Green Jesus seems to resolve a lot of his Cubase issues, so that's great. All right, so we have a question. What's musical mode? All right, so what musical mode is going to allow us to do is to take a audio file and have it fit the project tempo. So let's say we have a project here, and we have our tempo set to 100 beats a minute. So we listen to it. And now we could come over to, let's say, a drum loop. All right, let me just... All right, so I'm going to drop this particular drum loop in. All right, and we're going to start it, let's say, at measure 1. All right, so now when we listen to it, and of course I had to pick, so I'm going to change my tempo here because I picked the loop at the same tempo. All right, so I'm going to switch my tempo to say 88 beats a minute. All right, so right now, this loop is playing at 100 beats a minute, but my project tempo is set to 88 beats a minute. So what I could do is place this into musical mode. And once it's in musical mode, it's going to say, okay, what is the tempo that's going on? It's 88 beats a minute. So now I want to, as this loop plays back, it's going to stretch in real time to automatically fit the tempo. And if I say, okay, let's change this to 108 beats a minute or to 124, it's now going to automatically follow. So if it's not in musical mode, when I change the tempo, it's not going to follow and stay synced with the grid. And we can see that visually, but once we put it in musical mode, this will now play back at different speeds to fit the project tempo, and that's what musical mode does. All right, so we see Best Green Jesus wants to load all of his previous unfinished work so he can scroll endlessly in his recent folder. So try MediaBay. You could just come over to, if you wanted to come to MediaBay, you could say, okay, let's go to MediaBay and let's look at projects. So, and then you can say, okay, I want to do this computer. Here's all my projects and sort by date. So you could try that. All right, so wonderful to see Ian Rushmore on today. So thanks for joining us. All right, so we see Spike Williams is saying, blimey, I'm late. We'll catch up later, of course. Greetings from Wales. Thanks for joining us. All right, and the only consequence of being late is you have to hit the like button immediately. All right. All right, so you see from Ian Rushmore, question. When I import an audio clip and set the original BPM of the clip in the audio editor to work in musical mode, once I convert events to part, I can't find where to set the original BPM. Okay, so let's say I'm going to convert this into a part. So now when we double click, we go into the part editor. So let's see. All right, but I think it's still going to be in the pool window. So let's say if we come here, that, you should be able to set the tempo from the pool. Let me just see if there's... See if there's a way to just have the tempo indicated here, but I think you would just still do it in the pool window. Yeah, so just try Ian just to come over here and I think the audio file is going to behave the same way whether it's an event or part, but just go to the MediaBay, or not to MediaBay rather, but to the pool window, and then just set the tempo from there. And then once it's in musical mode, and let's just check to see. Yeah, and then once it's in musical mode, it'll still just respond to whatever tempo changes you have there. So try setting it in the pool window, Ian. I'm glad you can make it on. All right, so we have a question. When you're building a MIDI control template for a Kai MPD 226 drum pad controller, I get all the widgets for the knobs, sliders, pads created. I get all the sliders, knobs working, but no pads to trigger. So, make sure that when you're doing, the actual, so let's jump here. And as we're kind of, make sure that the, if you're building it, and let's say we're here and we want to, build, I'm not sure if you did a trigger pad or not for the function. But I'll just make this larger so we can. All right, so now when you come here, you click on the learn, and then you could just kind of see exactly what MIDI message. So make sure that there's MIDI messages. Sometimes what happens is, like, if you've assigned, those keys in a generic remote, that those may be kind of blocking the communication of those notes to be used inside of the MIDI remote script area. So make sure that those keys aren't assigned elsewhere. Okay, so we see a question from Eddie on drums. Clark, is Control Room CR on the right side a feature of Cubase 12 full? So it's only in the Pro version of Cubase. So I don't think it's in Elements or Artist. All right, so we see from Ian Rushmore, Greg, I have a feature request. I would like the control room panel to be undockable so I could drag it on another screen and still see the meters. Is it possible? So yeah, all you have to do is go to your studio menu, and then you'll see control room, and now you could just have your meters here if you wanted to just add the meters and put this on any screen you want. So if you wanted like the meters here to be showing master, showing dBs, and you want the control room to be showing loudness, you could have this as a freely available floating window that could be placed on other secondary monitors. So you see from Jazz Dude, maybe some people's questions are getting deleted. So sorry about that, but sometimes it seems like with YouTube, some people's questions don't make it into the discussion. So, and then sometimes they say, "Why aren't you seeing my questions?" And it's like we didn't have it. So, all right. So we see John Costigan has to leave early. Have a wonderful weekend, John, and thanks for joining us. All right, so we see, hi Greg, I just noticed that when I import a sample into the sampler, it gets out there in stereo, and my mono sample now has phasing problems. Is there a way of keeping it in mono? So realize that the sampler track is going to have a stereo output, so even if we have a mono file, just, and I don't think it's going to create issues. So let's say if I'm here, and I'll just revert this. So if I wanted to take the bass, this mono bass part here, and I'll drag it down. So, and I'll just choose to start right here. So it's playing back a mono file, but it's going out of a stereo track. So if you're doing stuff like panning, I could, but it doesn't seem to be adding any phase issues. So I don't think it would. Don't see why it would, but you could have mono files in there and still be able to kind of pan it out of the stereo outs. So let me know if I did something differently than you. All right, so we just see from Jose Antonio Gazo says, "Is there time for questions?" So yeah, definitely keep asking. All right, so we see from Mind Distribution or Mind Distortion System Official, is it possible to map a full analog synth like a Lesis Andromeda via MIDI through an RME sound card? So, it depends like what you want to map. So, you could use any of the buttons that transmit MIDI and capture that to control different devices. If you wanted to control the actual instrument, you could just simply record that as MIDI data through any MIDI interface, including an RME sound card. All right, wonderful to see Chris Hallam from Athens, Georgia, formerly of Columbia, South Carolina. Glad you could join us this afternoon. Okay, so we see question. Hello, Greg. When I arrange melodies, I use sounds from the MediaBay, but this is always stereo audio. Can I arrange melodies in mono from audio in MediaBay? So, it depends on whatever audio file that you have. So, there's, MediaBay can play back 5.1, stereo, mono, but if I just wanted to come to, this computer and say, okay, let's go to, my documents folder, and I want to go to projects, and we just want to listen to audio files, so all these are mono. So if we just want to, MediaBay will work, with mono, stereo, doesn't matter. So it shouldn't have any impact, on writing. So you could definitely work with, writing or, mono, stereo, 5.1, whatever. All right, so you just see maybe a follow-up says, if I create a sample track from the MediaBay, but that's a stereo track, but I want to make a mono track. So let me know how it's actually different. You could always, send it to a mono group if you needed to, but, every sampler I know, has stereo outputs so that you can pan and different things like that. So we see Jazz Dude has 2 old Kawai K1s keyboards from the late 80s and a Roland R5 all hooked up. So no problem. Yeah, my first synth was a Kawai K1 2 that added reverb. All right, so we just see so we say, greetings, I've got a question. According to the free warp tool, and I think we covered this, but I'll touch on it again. When I'm warping audio and then I use bounce to selection, new audio wave file changed drastically. Could you please show that process? Sorry, so. Okay, so come here. Let's get to our free warp. So as I'll just kind of add. All right, so I'll just undo that. So, and then I'm going to just duplicate this version. So let's say I'm going to make warp edits on it. Okay, so now when I come here, so let's say we come, so now we listen to it in what was kind of a normal drum loop. All right, so that's what I intentionally did. So now when I go to bounce selection, or do render in place, we'll go to audio to bounce selection, that all of those changes will automatically be applied to it. And if I wanted to go back to the original, it's still there. So let me know if I'm misunderstanding the question, but it seems to make sense. All right, so we have a question from Harry Olive. Says, question, are glued events are a part? What is the difference to a clip? All right, so we have, an event here. So, I drag the drum loop in, and, I come, and let's say I've made copies of this, and now I want to kind of treat these all together. So let's say, okay, I move this, that all of these will move to separate events. So if I want, so what a lot of people do is glue the events here. So you go, okay, now I have one container. So we could think of a part as a container of events. And when you notice it is like we may go into, let's say, the sample editor here, but now when we have parts that have been glued together, or events, I'm sorry, that have been glued together, this creates a part. And a part can be kind of a subset of events. Now, I often get this question when people are like, why can't I fade out on this particular event? Is because it's not an event, it's a part. And within the part, we could double click to go to the part editor, and now we could come over and adjust the fade handles and clip gain directly within the particular event. But if I wanted to always keep these together, then, having them as a part so that they can't get separated is kind of, the intention of the part editor. All right, so we see David Merritt says, I would like to be able to use a transpose track in cents, decimals of a semitone. I seem to only use whole numbers. So the transpose track is intended for semitones, but if you wanted to adjust, the actual, events here, that's when we could do the fine tune on the particular track. So, even if you wanted to take a number of tracks and do fine tuning, you could cut, split, and select, and then adjust fine tuning. But the transposition track, is designed to only be in semitones. All right, so we see Mr. O just saying crazy. Your mono sample came out in mono. I'm still going to try to put it in a project first and then the sampler track. So, all right. So I just see from Mr. O says, I just noticed a problem, Greg. Cubase is automatically changing my sample into stereo. I'm not getting the prompt box asking me how I want to convert the sample rate. I'm importing help. So if you want that, go to preferences, and when you go to editing, go to audio, and then you could choose on import audio files. You could just have it open options dialog box. So here you could convert it to the project settings, split channels, or copy all files to the project folder. But here just choose on import audio files to choose open options dialog. All right, we see Chris Hallam's just eagerly anticipating the Dorco release that he hopes will happen next week with some key editor improvements. So yeah, there's some nice stuff in there. So we got to have some discussions on that. All right. All right, so I think I'm at the end of the questions. I know we have a couple minutes left. We'll see if there's any more questions that kind of sneak in. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. I hope that everyone has learned a new tip or trick. And if so, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and also just make sure that you, leave a comment. And all right, we see Mr. O. Maybe that solved the problem for him with importing. All right, we'll just give it another minute. There's usually about 30 seconds or so from when I talk to when you guys are able to hear me. So, and again, we should have all the topics pinned to the top of the comments field later tonight. So that's what I get to do on my Friday nights is sit and watch the live stream again and do all the indexes and all the reports on it and stuff. So I want to thank everyone again for all the great questions. We'll see if there's any questions that kind of sneak in. If not, we'll wrap up a couple minutes early. Too bad Agent K wasn't on today, who gave me my trophy for getting through all the questions. So. All right, so we see, hi Greg, I swapped the alt click with control click function, especially the split and copy, but then the grid is not working anymore. So make sure that so I'm not sure if you have the J turned on to have that snap to the grid, or if so maybe you can let me know. All right, so you see Eddie on drums. Clark says, yes, I would be happy to answer a quick survey after this call. So that's good. Hopefully I'll get, 5 stars and be able to help customers. All right. All right, so you see Mr. O says, I'm still not sure how to get my mono sample to stay in mono. So, whatever, see when you drag it in, that it's an actual mono file as well. And, and if you have a particular sample, if you want to render it and share it with me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to kind of take a look at it. See kind words from Spike Williams, just saying thanks, Greg, for all your patience and great work. So, and Mr. O, just one of the things you could do is maybe just record a mono track and drop it in and see if it's behaving as expected, or if it's only doing that with like samples that you're buying from Splice. So that would be an interesting test. All right, so Michael Teams has granted me 5 stars, so that's good. I could keep my telemarketing job now. All right, we'll wait just another minute or so and see if there's anything else that comes in. All right, so I guess with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. I want everyone please have a safe, wonderful weekend, and we will see everyone back on Tuesday. Thank you so much, and we'll see everyone next week. Take care.